Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight on Spanning the Need. I am your host, Anthony Spano. My guest tonight, an educator and candidate for state representative of the 59th District, and we're going to have a great conversation, Chris Stanley. Thank you for joining me tonight, Chris.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tonight, we're going to talk about life, politics, and his campaign and what he's running for. Chris, let's get started. This is your first time running for office. Is that correct?
That is correct. I picked quite a year to do it.
Yes, you did. Something that I don't think anyone predicted of what was going to happen.
Right.
So tell our audience a little bit about yourself, kind of how you started in your life and where you come up to now.
Sure, absolutely. So like you said, my name is Chris Stanley. I'm a Democratic candidate for state rep here in the 59th. I am currently a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher for Youngstown City Schools. My wife is also a teacher, and I have 4 kids. So I have 3 girls, 16, 13, and 9, and then my son is just turned 6. So he's the most spoiled boy in America. We have a dog named Teddy Roosevelt, and we have 2 cats and 3 chickens. So there's a lot of living things under here, under this roof that we take care of. But yeah, I grew up in Grove City, Ohio, outside of Columbus, and we moved there because my dad got a job at a steel plant in Columbus. And I went to Ohio Dominican University, and actually I took a detour. I was at Ohio State, and I actually stopped going to Ohio State so I could go to the Ohio Fire Academy. And I actually graduated from the Ohio Fire Academy in 2000. And then I enrolled into my EMT school and completed that. And I actually was working as an EMT on an ambulance on a night shift while I went to school during the day to finish my bachelor's degree. And then I got my master's from Ohio Dominican as well in liberal studies. So, in my time, we grew up, we were a working class family. I was a roofer. I was a cabinet maker. I was a landscaper. And I'll never forget, I was landscaping a very famous person's house. Maybe if you buy me a beer sometime, I'll tell you who it was. And I remember the security guard. I'll just, yeah. But, I remember the security guards came out and said, listen, if she comes out, don't look her in the eye. She doesn't want to know you're here. And that has always stuck with me. And because I just think that speaks to the larger issues we have here in the United States, where if you have money, you are considered a valuable asset and a valuable person. And if you don't, if you're working class, you're often looked down upon. That has always stuck with me. But I also, of course, have that firsthand experience in the public service industry as well, being, a firefighter and an EMT, and now as a teacher as well. So I really think I have a wide variety of experiences. I've done a lot of things in my time. I have been a tour guide to Washington, D.C. I've written part of the 4th and 8th grade historical textbook for the Historical Society. I've been the program manager of research and education for International Student Affairs Association. And, I'm also a children's book author. I have written 5 children's books and have my own publishing company as well. And I have been the vice president of operations for a statewide business, the Whistle and Keg. So, I think if you're looking for a candidate that knows the needs of working people in our state, knows the need of our public services and our educators and business, I'm that person. And I think that really makes me a unique candidate that's able to speak directly to a lot of what our families are going through here in Ohio.
I have to have a follow-up question. So you're a social studies teacher.
Yes, sir.
And you said your cat was named Teddy Roosevelt.
My dog is named Teddy Roosevelt.
Your dog. What are your cats' names? Because I have a feeling that this is going to come.
So we have 2 female cats, but they're both like male names. So we have one is Stella, but we started calling her Ringo Stella instead of Ringo Starr, And then when we got the second rescue cat, we were calling her Santana, but that has just sort of devolved into Carlos. So we have Ringo and Carlos there for our cats' names.
Nice. Well, and I'll think, and I know you enlightened a little bit on this, but we talked a little bit about, you talked about your background and what kind of really holds with you. And before that, we're now in a pandemic. Why run for state rep? I think that, why do you want to get into public service and run for the 59th district?
So, that's a good question that people have asked me, especially with the craziness of this year. But, I'll tell you, for me, it's a really simple answer. Public service has always been something that I've striven toward, whether it's being in the public safety industry or now with public education. And so this is something, getting involved in larger public roles has always been something I've aspired to, being a history major and a real history dork my whole life. Politics is sort of tangentially always around everything I've talked about and studied. And so here in Ohio, I'm seeing what's going on in our state, and I'm wishing that someone would step up and do something about it. And, back in last November, the Republican candidate here was going to go unopposed. And I was looking around, and then I remembered, what? I teach my students every single day that in the United States, an individual can make a difference in people's lives and in the communities they live in. And quite frankly, I was tired of looking around wishing someone would do something. And I thought maybe I'm the person that can do something. And so using that, background knowledge I have of all of my favorite people I study in history, I stepped up. It's something I wanted to do, but I kind of assumed to be 10 years from now. I mean, we're busy. We're teachers. We have 4 kids. I've got a little small business on the side. But to me, what we are facing is so much bigger than my little what's going on in my own personal cloud here that I really felt I had a lot to offer. And so that's why I stepped up.
And let's talk a little bit about that. You talk about history and being AKA what you just said. I quote dork,
Yes.
and you know what? I love history too. So
Yeah.
I'll be very honest. I'm very open in these conversations that I talk to candidates and talk about their lives and their families. What person resembles you in the past in history? What is your role model in regards to having someone run for office as well? Do you have one?
Well, yeah, and not to sound cliche, but to me, the role model in American politics is Abraham Lincoln. What I teach my own students who are, we're on 100% free and reduced lunch at my school. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin. It doesn't matter if you were born in a log cabin. It doesn't matter if you have cracks in your foundation and holes in your roof. You, based on the merit of your own abilities, can rise and make a difference in this country. And when I think about Abraham Lincoln, he really was a true warrior poet. I mean, people, we've sort of, we know about the apotheosis of Washington. We've almost turned Washington into this godlike figure, right? And he would be mortified at that, by the way. But when you think about Abraham Lincoln, we've done the same thing. Abraham Lincoln was very human, and people forget that he had his own flaws. He was this sort of tragically beautiful character, and people forget at one time Abraham Lincoln was so suicidal that his friends took all sharp objects from his house, and he couldn't get out of bed for a month. So when we talk about modern issues, I, I think Abraham Lincoln is so fascinating, and Abraham Lincoln knew that this is what I think has been lost in politics, and what I always try to keep at the forefront of my mind is that, it's not about me as a person, right? The reason I want to run, the reason for public service is to serve the larger good, is to work for you. And Abraham Lincoln, I feel, never lost sight of that. He never made it about him personally. It was always about our greater good and our common cause. And if you see that from, bringing in rivals into his cabinet, from always speaking, kindly about his opponents, from finding ways to always do what was right. He was very pragmatic. Sometimes he did a little shady things, but he knew it was for the greater good, and so he got that done. And he was able to define beautifully the very purpose of this nation. When people talk about all of our issues we have going on with Supreme Court and constitutional originalism and on and on and on, people forget that our second founding was from Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. Our Constitution we are under today is from that second founding. Remember, Lincoln knew the flaws in the Constitution, much like our founding fathers knew about the flaws. And so that's why he always appealed to our Declaration of Independence. This is our purpose. And we tried to define that purpose in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which the 13th, he was crucial in making sure that it was passed. And so I just think that as far as a politician that is every bit as human as us today, with all of the things we go through and our flaws and our jokes. Abraham Lincoln used to sit up all night long telling dirty jokes to his interns, in the War Office and trading stories. But to also be able to define the purpose of our great common cause, I think that is so lost today. Politicians, especially here in our state, they've made public service about themselves and their own power. And it's been to the detriment of the people of this state for over a decade. And I just think that is such a travesty in American history. And I really wish we would get back to serving the greater good, no matter what party you're on, because I just think we've lost sight of that entirely.
Well, and I think that's and I'm a Abraham Lincoln, JFK, some of those. I don't know as much history as they do. That's a new one, that Abraham Lincoln was telling jokes in the War Department.
All the
time. But let me ask you that. Go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, you know what? What was it? Totally slipped my mind now. You can tell we're a week from the election that my brain, I'm at capacity. So it's gone.
I think everyone is, because you can't campaign like you normally do. Yeah. In a variety of different ways.
Right. Yeah, so it's been so just to backtrack about my race, just to show you what this year has been like. I jumped in last November against a very powerful incumbent, Don Manning. He was going to have all the money from the state Republican Party behind him. He was going to be a very powerful incumbent. He unfortunately passed away in March. And then, that changed the entire outlook of the election, obviously. And then in the summer, you had Larry Householder arrested on RICO charges, making him the most corrupt politician in our modern state history. And then my opponent was handpicked by Larry Householder himself. And I don't know if you saw the finance reports that came out, but, the state party has spent upwards of $200,000 against me in this race. And that money is because Larry Householder was able to move it. They didn't freeze it with the FBI. So we're facing, this has been a crazy year. And when if that was all it was, it would be an unprecedented race. Throw in the fact that we are on this global pandemic and dealing with everything that is, man, this has been an absolute crazy year, especially for a person like me deciding to get into politics for the first time.
Well, one thing I've learned and talked to a lot of the candidates, and depends what subject you talk about, is that people are spending more time on TV, radio, and social media platforms because, or I should say, on mailing literature than they have in forever because of the pandemic. People are at home, people are working, they're really not doing anything else. Is that kind of what you've been doing too as well?
Yeah, we've got our mailers out there. We have I did a lot what I focused on this year because, being a teacher, my secret weapon was going to be knocking on every single door in this district during the summertime. And that went right out the window. So I kind of transitioned to the old, I was thinking about what other politicians have done in the past. And I kind of went to the old front porch campaigns. And so I made these videos called Porch Thoughts. And I would sit on my front porch and record videos and put those out. And so that was a big part of my campaign. And that really was the first way people started to really get to know who I was, just from listening to me on these porch talk videos. So yeah, mailers, calls, luckily we are in a year where really, no matter what side you're on, people are very highly motivated this election season. So we have had just such wonderful volunteers helping to call, helping to text, spreading the word on and on and on. So it's been really, it's been interesting, but we have made it through. And, we do, of course, still going around the doors, with lit dropping, but we wear masks and we social distance. And, we haven't done a lot of knock, stand there and talk. It's been a lot more of dropping stuff off and moving on.
Well, let me ask you this. So people may not know, describe what areas the 59th District of Ohio is. So people understand. So if you're living in a specific area, this is what the 59th District encompasses.
Yeah, so we are in Mahoning County. So Mahoning County has two state rep districts, the 58th and the 59th. So the 59th district is pretty much the 224 corridor. So you have Canfield, Boardman, Poland, and then you kind of have the surrounding areas. So Springfield, New Middletown, North Lima, Craig Beach, and part of Austintown as well. So it's a very wide area, and it has the three big suburbs, but it also has that rural component as well. It's a big district. It's a big district, but that's where we are. So it's mostly a suburban and rural area here in Mahoning County.
So if you live in those communities, you'll be looking to vote for the 59th district of your choice. So
Yeah.
let's take it to the issues at hand. So we're in a pandemic right now, okay?
Yep.
So, but I'm going to get to the pandemic here in a little bit. So my next question will be is how and what changes, if any, that you'll make once you become the representative? What are your plans?
Well, I'll tell you what, these have been my same priorities since last November, and they haven't changed with the pandemic. In fact, I think they've only made them more apparent that it need to be done. So first, as you can imagine, education policies. Being a teacher, this has been an important issue of mine. And everything we're facing, in my opinion, goes back to education. Some things I want to implement that are new is I want to make K-12 social studies and civics education every bit as important as STEM is in our schools. We are not preparing our students to become citizens in this democracy, period. And I don't know how we hope to sustain our republic if we are not teaching our students how to be citizens in this republic. That has to change, and that starts with K-12. But some of the education issues we're facing that I want to get done, we have been operating under an unconstitutional funding formula since 1997. We base our school funding formula on property taxes, which in and of itself creates a system of socioeconomic inequality. And that means also with your property taxes, they constantly go up. You constantly have to pass levies, on and on and on. We have to fix that. By the way, ask anyone to explain Ohio's funding formula to you and to do it in less than 2 hours. Good luck. Maybe call up Pythagoras himself from the afterlife, because it's unbelievably complicated and unconstitutional as well. But we also have to get out of this system of we live right now in a culture of standardized testing. We know for a fact that standardized testing is not the way to measure student growth and learning. As teachers, we are taught that every child learns differently. We have to use differentiated instruction and a wide variety of teaching methods and on and on and on. Yet we teach every single child in the state the exact same test on one day. By the way, we don't get that info till the summertime. So how am I supposed to see what they are struggling on and improve them in that intermediate time? It doesn't work. Moreover, schools shouldn't be compared to one another. Schools should be held accountable to their own communities. We are teaching kids nowadays to take a test. We are not teaching them how to learn and how to think critically. That's not their fault. That's our fault because of these policies we put in place. If we're serious about education, we have to get it fixed. 15 years ago, Ohio was in the top 5 of education in America. We have fallen to 23rd, and it lines up entirely with this culture of standardized testing, this flawed report card system that we have here, and these for-profit charters draining our public schools dry. That's not a coincidence. If we're serious about education, let's move towards authentic assessments. Let's get rid of for-profit charters. Again, choice isn't the issue. For-profit charters, which make private owners rich off the back of our students, while our public school district lose hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not okay. Yeah,
let me ask this: do charter schools, and I know I've heard this, but I have not looked it up. Do charter schools have to follow the exact same rules as K-12 public schools?
In theory. However, even with the funding formula, they get more money per student based upon the funding formula. So the way the funding formula works is school district X is supposed to get this amount per student based on their socioeconomic status. Well, no school district gets that because you only get a percentage of that. And so when a student from District X goes to a for-profit charter, not only does that school district lose that money, but they lose more money than they would have gotten if that student would have went to that district, because they get more money to go to that private charter. And that all comes out of local school budgets. And Local schools are responsible for providing the busing and on and on and on. It's absolutely absurd here. We have to make education in this state a priority if we want to fix everything else that we've got going on here. Another big one are our tax policies. Listen, since the Kasich administration alone, our local governments have lost $9 billion. Every single year in Ohio, our local governments lose $1 billion of tax revenue from things like the LLC loophole. What does that mean? Lobbyists and lawyers pay $0 on their first $250,000 of income. And that costs us $1 billion a year in this state. If you want to know why you have to pay for an ambulance ride, it's because of that. If you want to know why our police forces can't afford body cameras, it's because of these policies. We have to fix these. We have to start rebuilding our communities. The burden of funding our vital services that we all need and that we all deserve cannot fall squarely upon the shoulders of the working and middle class anymore. Everyone has to pay their fair share if we want the communities that we all deserve. They've tried to nationalize my race, okay? And so I've had negative mailers out here about me that said, oh, Chris Stanley wants to defund the police, which is hilarious because I was a firefighter. My brother-in-law is a police officer, and these have been my policies since last November, but I digress. Republicans in this state have been defunding the police for the last decade, and our fire for the last decade, in our schools and our road because of these policies. We have to fix these and rebuild our communities. We have infrastructure problems here in the 59th as we do around this entire state. We need to start being proactive instead of reactive, waiting for the worst to happen before we move. We have a lot of flooding issues here. We have a lot of pipe issues here. You know, where Poland meets Struthers, the pipe goes from 8 inches down to 2 inches. Think that causes any problems? You know, it's on and on and on. We have to address these issues now. And we can do it if we simply close loopholes in our tax policies that allow the wealthiest among us not to pay their fair share. Here.
I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
Can I follow up? What is the definition of wealthy? Is it over a million, like a millionaire?
Yeah.
Like,
well, you know, for me,
just understanding I
think for me, I go back to these loopholes, right? Like if you look at the LLC loophole, you know, the first $250,000 for lobbyists and lawyers, you know, most people in this district, you know, most middle class across this nation live paycheck to paycheck and have less than $1,000 in a savings account. You know, if you are a family that's able to put thousands of dollars away into savings every single year, you're not part of the normal now. You know, that's not part of the norm now. Most families live paycheck to paycheck and they struggle. And we live in this constant state of debt, right? And so I think that if you're in a position where you're making $250,000, not having to pay any income tax, I think we consider that, you know, wealthy by today's standards. And I think that, you know, it's fundamentally unfair. You know, the people that can afford it the most have to pay the least. And that doesn't make any sense in our state and in our country. And, you know, I think, let me say two other things here that have been priorities of mine. First of all, I want to rip down the for sale sign that has been placed in front of our state house. The most blatant example of this is House Bill 6. This is what got Larry Householder arrested. This is what our state is caught up in right now. You know, not only did House Bill 6 bail out a private energy company for $1 billion that you and I get to pay for, including $100 million a year to a coal burning plant in Indiana. So I'm still waiting to hear how that helps any of us here in Ohio. But they were so flush with cash because we are giving them $1 billion of our own public dollars that they paid $300 million in private stock buybacks. First Energy's headquarters is 3 blocks away from the University of Akron. The University of Akron is facing a $65 million shortfall, laying off faculty and services, on and on and on. So in our state, we have this system of corporate socialism where private for-profit companies get all of our money and our tax dollars and our utility bills, while our great public institutions are left to wither on the vine. We have our priorities completely backward in this state. You know, and if House Bill 6 was just about saving those jobs at the nuclear plants, we could have had that conversation. That's a worthy conversation to have, but it didn't need to include the rolling back of the clean energy standards, which has taken Ohio out of the 21st century economy, Here in our valley, House Bill 6 cost us a natural gas plant and 1,200 union jobs because the rollback of these clean energy standards. And it's all based on corruption. They have paid off, Larry Householder. I have a buddy who's a lieutenant with Columbus Police, and he told me that the FBI doesn't have a press conference like this unless this is an open and shut slam dunk case. Larry Householder is going to jail. Okay, he will be down as one of the most corrupt politicians in our state history. And the GOP here in Ohio, they are complicit in this culture of corruption. And by the way, just let me say, they're not corrupt because they're Republicans. I know many fine Republicans. Half of my family are Republicans. They are corrupt because they lost sight of what public service is. Public service isn't about you. It's not about maintaining power at all costs. It's about serving the people. We're supposed to work for you. They've lost sight of that, and they got too intoxicated with their own power. And so if you look at my opponent's campaign finance report, you're going to see max donations from representative number 8 on the FBI report, on and on and on. Until we enact real campaign finance reform in this state, until we shine a light on this dark money and get rid of this, this is going to be the norm in our state. And so we really need to ask ourselves, Republicans, Democrats, independents, everything in between, do you want to live in a place where your government is chosen because they have the most money? Do you want your government to be able to choose the voters by gerrymandering? Or do you want fair maps? Do you want campaign finance reform so the people of this state can pick their government? We're at a real crossroads right now. And if we don't decide that, this House Bill 6 nonsense, all of this dark money, this is going to be the norm in our state. And we're going to lose the very soul of our democracy if we don't fix these things now. And we stand up, tell the supermajority it's not okay. And by the way, in a state that is 51-49 Republican to Democrat, there's no reason that our government should have a supermajority of Republicans that don't need one single Democratic vote to pass anything. That doesn't serve all the people of this state. That serves a power structure. By the way, I wouldn't want the Democratic Party to have a supermajority either. I really believe progress is made in the middle, and that is how we can advance. And that, with the supermajority and the gerrymandering we have here in the state, that has rendered that absolutely impossible. And it's just, it's a shame. They have stolen our government from us, and we have to take it back.
Well, let me follow up with one. So, the Mahoning Valley is one of the very depressed areas for economic and jobs. In probably one of the top areas in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
What is your plan?
The poorest city in America, actually.
I'm sticking with Ohio for right now.
Yeah.
What are some of your plans to have economic growth and jobs in the valley?
Yeah. So I think that investing in our communities is the key. And the first thing we can do is repeal House Bill 6, because what that does is now we can have, so there are over 80,000 clean energy jobs in our state right now. Okay. There's only about 3,000 in coal. Not that those need to go away. Okay. I think we can use all of the above. But if we repeal House Bill 6, we can really make Ohio, and especially here in the Mahoning Valley, we can really turn this Rust Belt into the Tech Belt. I really believe that. If you look at what's going on at Lordstown with, the electric battery plant and the electric truck plant, that's the tip of the iceberg. We have a highly motivated workforce here that are skilled laborers that are ready to transform this entire valley into the Tech Belt. But until we repeal House Bill 6, until we can allow foreign investment in our energy sector, and until we can allow clean energy to really thrive in this state, that's not going to happen. It is right in front of us right now. That can be our next great economic endeavor if we just make sure that our government's not in the pockets of First Energy anymore. And so to me, Anthony, if we repeal House Bill 6, we really invest into a clean and renewable energy, I think Ohio could be facing a boom, especially here in the Valley, starting next year.
Well, and let me follow up. We talk about next year,
Yeah.
Do you feel so? Right now, we're in a pandemic. Okay,
Hmm.
we've been in a pandemic probably since March or April, where Ohio really shut down. Their
Yeah.
governor DeWine, and people say that I love the slogan that hey, the pandemic will be over on November 4th, which I kind of I laugh about. Which
Yeah.
I think everyone knows that we're looking at probably spring, depending on when a vaccine comes, and some
Right.
other things moving forward. What would be some of your plans for the pandemic, or do you agree with what Governor DeWine has done with closing down, social distancing? What would you agree or do differently? Is would be
Yeah.
the
I think
question.
I think first of all, if we don't use part of that $2.7 billion rainy day fund, we are going to face an absolute economic disaster in the wintertime when our bars and restaurants are going to have to shut down again if this thing keeps continue to get worse. So for me, I want to make sure we push that $2.7 billion that's just sitting there in our state account, that should be used to help relieve these small businesses, these mom and pop businesses, and these bars and restaurants. The one of the saddest things for me that I saw with this pandemic is that places like Starbucks and Dunkin', they received PPP money, yet they had higher profits than any time in any year previous. Meanwhile, the businesses that money was supposed to go to, the individual bars and restaurants and shops, on and on and on, they didn't get that money, and they're going to have to pay it back. Well, giant corporations just get, grants that they don't have to pay back. Again, we have our priorities wrong here. We have to be able to use that money to help these people, these businesses. And by the way, you know, we're teaching online right now. I, of course, was the vice president of operation for our statewide restaurant and bar. I wanted to get back in my classroom. I want my friends in the service industry to be able to earn their living. If we simply wore masks and social distance, we could go on living relatively normal. We could go out to eat and we could go out to shop and do those things. But because for some reason that I am scratch my head at every single day, we have turned wearing a mask into some sort of a larger conspiracy theory about government control. It's beyond me. If we really want to help get our economy started again, just wear a damn mask. I mean, simple, period. When I talk about this with people, and I use this story to illustrate my point. When I was 20 years old, I was a new MT. It was my first week on the job. And we were taking this woman to the ER. And she was mid 30s and she was just hacking, just constantly hacking. We gave her a dish, she could spit up in and all this stuff. I knew from my training, I was supposed to put a mask on her. I was young, I was inexperienced, and quite frankly, I was embarrassed. So I didn't do it. We take her to the ER, we do everything, okay? We go on. A week later, I'm sitting in the back of an ambulance. We're just waiting for a run. And I start feeling pretty bad. Within an hour, I am in the ER. I can't even stand. I cannot even stand up for a chest x-ray. And remember, I'm 6'5". I was 230 pounds, in shape, 20-year-old dude, right? Couldn't even stand up for my x-ray. I caught bacterial pneumonia from this woman. Guess how I could have prevented that or mitigated my risk? Simply putting a mask on her. Does that mean my risk would have been 0? Of course not. But it sure as hell wouldn't have been 100, right? And so, people are like, masks don't work, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how we got to the point where basic common sense and facts are gone nowadays, but it's sad in this state. And if we really, truly care about getting our economy back up and running and our kids back up in school, you literally wear a mask.
And we
Pretty
actually
simple.
it was funny. It was funny you talk about that. Is I worked with Mr. Ralph, the science guy from OWOW,
Okay, yeah.
and
I know Ralph well.
and yeah, and Tim Stranick, who's the environmental healthy specialist at Youngstown State, and we did an episode on what masks work and what don't work. So
Okay.
that was, I mean, if people would just simply watch that, just simple,
Yeah.
we're just general understanding people that science background, you may not believe science, that's fine. But when we show you
Is it though?
live, when we show you live demonstrations we're able to show you what works and what doesn't. And
Yeah.
I will say this: no masks that we wear, except maybe, and I say maybe, N95s are 100%,
Right.
unless you're wearing a whole outbreak type suit. That's
Yeah.
totally different. But when we're just talking about normal, common thread, common masks, cotton masks, I think that's where it's not 100%. I think everyone
Right.
knows that.
Right.
But like you said, it's the common sense of just wear a mask.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's about mitigating risk, right? Like, of course, it's not 100%, but if you can
Hmm.
decrease your chance of spreading that infection by 25%, why wouldn't we want to? Why wouldn't we want to do that? I mean, I don't know where we are in our current politics. Again, I'm thinking about us in sort of a long span of history arc here, but we are currently in some sort of era where we think doing something for someone else somehow isn't part of our American ethos. And I don't know how we got there, how we got to the point where we're like, I don't want to wear a mask because I don't want to. I don't care if it helps you or not. It's a real shame, and I don't think that really that's the country any of us want to live in, or that's not the country I grew up believing in. I was born in 1980, so I was in elementary school during the Reagan years, and then of course you're growing up in my formative years in the glorious 90s, and the America that I grew up in, the America that I still want to believe in and that I teach my kids about, it is this shining city upon a hill, right? It is this place where we can do anything if we come together and do that. When I'm looking around today, I can only imagine what these people would have done in 1942 when they were told they had to have meatless Mondays or they couldn't have, a bag of sugar this week. I mean, my God, the sacrifice for the common good, that concept is largely gone from our society now. And it's a shame. And it starts with
Let me ask
leadership.
you. Let me follow up with this. And like you said, you're a history teacher. Have you taught your students the Spanish flu?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We
So
talk about that. And especially here in Youngstown, it was brutal in the Mahoning Valley. And if you look at all these pictures, actually an interesting
I'm getting
story
off
about,
topic, but it's just
yeah.
something I wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, so an interesting story about this is the Spanish flu, which originated in Kansas. Um, there was a first wave and it killed a lot, but the second wave is what was really deadly. And by the way, really the reason Germany surrendered in World War I is because their army was so decimated with the flu. I mean, that really is what did it in. But the theory goes is that the pandemic was coming under control somewhat, and at the end of World War I, on the 11th month of the 11th hour of the 11th day, the crowds were so excited, of course, that World War I ended. There were celebrations everywhere. People packed the streets, people packed in the bars, on and on and on. And that winter is when hundreds of thousands of people died with the Spanish flu. And so, again, it's cliche. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, right? It seems that we are right back there. If you look at pictures, especially in the Mahoning Valley from the Spanish flu, people are wearing masks. Police officers would go into establishments and give tickets and kick people out because they knew this is how it spreads. This is the public health risk. And people forget that because people don't want to be bothered at all anymore. And it doesn't matter what it's for. And it's just a shame. And I'll tell you, I'm very nervous about this coming winter and this second wave. And, I just pray that it's not going to have to be a very hard learned lesson that we're going to face here in the United States.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Best accomplishment. It could be personal or professional.
Sure. I think my best accomplishment is being a father here, being an active father in my kids' lives. I had a pretty rough upbringing, and I have not been perfect. We're a blended family. I've been divorced, but one thing that I've always kept sight on is that the well-being of my children is number one importance. And my ex and I work very well together to do that. My wife and I and our family, we always do that. And so really, not to sound too sappy, but I really think that is my greatest accomplishment, and my kids are my greatest accomplishment and my legacy.
Best memory.
Best memory. You know what?
I'll give you some tough questions. These are about the toughest they're going to get.
I know. You want to talk politics all day, and we got best memory. Oh, you know what? I have, I mean, a lot of really good memories, but some of my best memories are when I was in middle or high school. My 8th grade trip to Washington D.C. changed my life. I sort of wanted to be a paleontologist up until that time. I was really into, dinosaurs and anthropology and archaeology. I loved it, and that's what I wanted to pursue. When we went to our 8th grade trip, I was just mesmerized and intoxicated by the district and the history and the possibilities. And really, I think that's what's led me in the direction of pursuing political science and history and on and on and on. And to this day, Washington, D.C. is still my favorite city on the planet. And every time I go there, I'm that 14-year-old boy again, just in awe here. So I'm gonna chalk that one up. Favorite memory.
Okay. And then the last question: if there was one person you could meet, past or present, who would it be?
See, now this is a tough question because sometimes you don't want to meet your heroes, right? But we started with Abraham Lincoln. Let's end there. If I could meet one person in the past, it would be Abraham Lincoln. I think just to be able to pick his brain, he was a wonderful storyteller. He was wise and philosophical. I think to be able to sit down with Abraham Lincoln for an hour would be fantastic. A close runner-up, Benjamin Franklin. That was a fascinating man.
Chris, I appreciate you taking time, and it's always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining and taking time out of your busy schedule. You're always welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Check out our other podcast interviews and videos at anthonyvspano.com. Be safe, and God bless.